very excited to present the last panel before we come back to a short round of sharing and closing, which you should not miss as well, and making it even more concrete and making it even more on the ground, because that's the topic of the Planet Day, making it happen, climate action on the ground. And the ground in this case is to be seen literally. It is the soil under our feet. There is a wonderful film called Kiss the Ground. The solution is under our feet. I recommend very much seeing it. It's very inspiring. And when I heard about Ivo and the climate farmers, that was one element of me thinking, yeah, we have to have something like this in our Planet Day, because the solution is really so close. It is really so obvious. We have to, get a better sense of life and recreating our systems of subsistence and of making a living and having a higher appreciation again of how we live and what we eat and what we touch, and that actually the solution to the climate crisis is local, it's close, it's connected, and in terms of emissions, in terms of biodiversity, the agricultural sector is responsible for a lot, at least 25% of carbon, probably even a lot more of biodiversity loss and nutricycles, all of that. The solution is at our feet. I'm very happy to have Ivo here, Ivo Degn. He's the founder of Climate Farmers. He also grew up on a farm, and he will tell us about his approach, his company, his startup, which is mainly focusing on bringing regenerative farming to farmers and bringing regenerative farmers to companies and using regenerative farming to help companies offset their emissions, because companies want to be good, at least many of them more and more do. They are looking, okay, where can we actually do good? Where can we actually make a difference? And instead of just buying some stoves in Africa, maybe there is something very tangible they can do around the corner, which has immediate meaning to them and their employees. So excited to hear about this, and Ivo introduced me to Hannes and Alba of Good Haidehof. Good Haidehof, if you research on it, is one of the regenerative farms that is living it, that is practicing it, that is harvesting it. Actually, Alba just said she's coming from the fields and harvesting in the rain, and her colleagues are still harvesting, so you're in the dry, so you're welcome. And they will walk you through what they do. And then there is room for questions, and I will beam myself out and just listen in awe and joy to what you have to share. Thank you for being here today. And I pass to Ivo and Hannes and Alba.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, and looking forward. Honestly, I have to say I'm not sure if I'm starting or if Hannes and Alba do.
Ivo, go ahead.
All right, I will. Well, wonderful. Then let me introduce a bit about both regenerative agriculture and our work on why and what exactly we are doing here. Let me share my screen. So what we are seeing with regenerative agriculture is the potential in renewable.
It's coming.
Translation. The potential is incredible, and the need is incredible. We see that agriculture, yes, has a large role in climate change. It is also one of its first victims. This picture is from a drought we had in Germany 2 years ago, and it's incredible how much this looks like the Sahara Desert, for example. And this is something that we have to face. Agriculture is one of the first victims of climate change, and we will have strange weather, unusual weather from now on pretty much every year going forward. And so how does that affect farmers? And we'll hear much more and much better from Hannes and Alba directly. But just an example from our program. We have a young farmer that took over his family's farm a few years ago. And then, this drought hit. And so the first couple of years, he had almost complete crop failures. And so, they begin asking themselves the question of like, okay, well, we have these severe weather events. We, as a farm, you're dependent on world market prices, you're on economic uncertainty, all of these questions. The reputation of farmers is deteriorating, and you're really not well seen in society. And so farmers at that point, when they think about the long-term vision, tend to find regenerative agriculture. And what do we mean when we say regenerative agriculture? For us, we have just spent a couple of months interviewing international experts on the question, and what can we call regenerative agriculture? For us, it is if you can see a regenerative effect, because agriculture, you have to be extremely context specific in your application of specific, regenerative practices or agricultural practices in order to reach that regenerative effect that we're looking for, which is, on the one hand, obviously, we need high quality food production. That is nutrient dense food that is really healthy. That is also nutrient cycling, so moving, for example, nitrogen of manure, of animal manure around in the system. Water infiltration and storage. We have seen floods in Germany very recently, 2 days of flood, 30 billion in damages. And so we need our agricultural fields to capture rain that falls and store that and hold that for times of drought. We need to capture carbon in the soil, and I will talk more about that in a minute. And we need the biodiversity. All of these are extremely relevant topics for us as a society that agriculture can have a massive impact on, or has a massive impact on. When we're talking about climate, we all know, sorry, there's a translation missing here, but we all know that we definitely have to reduce our emissions to the max, but we have to go beyond that. We don't only have to reduce emissions because we are already at a too high level. We need to actually draw down the carbon from the atmosphere and capture it safely somewhere. And as it happens, agriculture can do that. Agriculture can store carbon, atmospheric carbon, and bring that into the ground where it is held relatively well and really produces a lot of benefits. The question for the farmers is that actually worth it? Like, why would I do that? Great, that society wants that from me, but like I'm already with my back to the wall, and does that make sense? And there aren't many studies about that yet, but those that are show us that yes, some regenerative agriculture, and I'm very careful with that because we also have very good reason to believe that a lot of regenerative agriculture is going to have the same or higher amounts of yield. But okay, well, some regenerative agriculture is going to have lower yield, but the studies show that even with the lower yield, we can have much higher profits. And this is a very interesting point. As a society, we have optimized agriculture to give us maximum yields. We want as much food as possible. And this is our industrial agriculture after Second World War, where we really want to make sure nobody goes hungry, which is a very noble goal, and has given us the agriculture system that we have today, one that has a lot of externalized costs. We destroy a lot of ecosystems. We produce a lot of food, but that food has relatively low nutrient density, and the farmers produce record yields over every decade. Sort of our yield grows, but at the same time they don't actually take much money home. For many farmers, actually, they have so many input costs at the beginning of the season. Then maybe you have a drought, maybe you have rain, maybe you have hail, maybe you have a storm. You might lose a lot of that. And if you do harvest, then in the end, you have to first pay off all the costs you had in the first place. With regenerative agriculture, we reduce the inputs, and we're going to hear probably more about that in a bit. We can reduce the inputs, we can increase the resilience of our plants and produce higher profits. Also, very interestingly, we see that the pest density of regenerative farms is much lower. So even though we are not treating with pesticides, because the plants are better, are more healthy, same as with our bodies, right? Like if we eat fast food and don't treat our bodies well, we're going to get sick more often. Same with plants. If we feed plants in a way that they grow healthily, they're going to have less problems with pests, and you have less costs for pesticides, and of course, less damages from pesticides. So what we're seeing is great. We have regenerative agriculture as a resilient, more productive, healthier, and more profitable form of agriculture. But what is still missing is financing, knowledge, and transparency. So we have our farmers, and they approach us and say, great, I'm interested in regenerative agriculture. I've heard of this. I have this large, conventionally cultivated farm, and I've heard of regenerative agriculture. I'm interested in that. How do I do that? And that's when an interesting exploration happens, where you have to look at, well, what is the farm exactly, which is our Climate Farmers Academy, and what is the specific context that is both climatic, that is the soil type, but it's also, the farm, the family, and what are they interested in, and what makes sense in that specific context. When we have that, we can go into how do we finance such a transition, because in the end, the farm needs to invest and needs to take risks, and that is something that most farms can't do because they face a lot of debt. And so what we do with climate farmers, slightly complicated slide, sorry about that, is to collect different data sources to measure the outcome in terms of carbon, in terms of biodiversity, in terms of water, in terms of other sort of positive outcomes that I was referring to before, and translate those into payments through CO2 certificates that we call carbon plus certificates, because it's really, carbon is an incredibly important metric, but it's not the only one. So basically the farmers regenerate their soils, and we quantify that and allow for businesses to finance the transition of farmers from the system where they are at today to one that is going to be more stable into the future. And if anybody listening today, part of a company looking into CO2 certificates, this is something that we are rolling out right now. This is relatively new. And what we're trying to create is really the highest quality carbon certificate from agriculture in existence right now. It's still a very, very young sector. We're trying to create one where we have the highest possible quality standards. At the same time, the biggest part of the margin goes to the farmers instead of staying with middlemen. So anybody who's interested in piloting that with us, please reach out. That would be very interesting. And I think with that, there's a lot more we could say about the technology, but really the point is, what we need to create right now is to take the knowledge from pioneering farms such as Good Haidehof, such as a number also of ecological farms, a lot of farms that have been experimenting with regenerative agriculture already for decades, take what we know from research and build a bridge to the large agricultural sector. And there's huge interest coming right now from the conventional sector, and bring that out and really scale regenerative agriculture throughout Europe. Our goal is to reach 10% of Europe's farmland to be under regenerative management within the next couple of years. This sounds incredibly big, and it is not unlikely at all. So with that, I would like to hand over back to Hannes and Alba. I'm really curious to see and hear more of what is happening at Good Haidehof.
Yes, thank you very much, Ivo. Now let's see if we can get this technology to share our screen. That looks all right. Now we just need to get the right thing there. Perfect. So, on behalf of our team, Alba and me are going to tell you a little bit about the regenerative farming we do here on the ground. Everything started last year with Stefan, Astrid, and Alba. And this year, or actually the year before last year, it started, and last year Borg and me joined. And by now we are a core team of 5, basically doing the strategic regenerative development here at Haidehof. And I'm quickly going to tell you a little bit about myself, and then Alba is going to give you an introduction on her side. My name is Hannes, I'm 30 years, and by training I'm an environmental engineer for water technology. And in the past I worked in development projects, in construction sites, water monitoring, and I've been always quite passionate about the realm of water, passionate in scuba diving. But at some point I realized how many problems we have at the oceans, and that we actually don't really belong there, and that we belong more on land, and that there is a lot of potential if we apply good land use to save our oceans at the same time. And that brought me to land use and agriculture about 7 years ago. And now I'm working at Haidehof, mainly in sales, communication, and I support in the animal business we run here. And we'll tell you a little bit more of what we do after Alba has told you a little bit about herself.
Hello. I'm not very used to talk for people, so I hope you excuse me. So I started farming 12, 13 years ago. Was one of these very lost girls, a rebel partying, really wondering why was I here in this planet. And I was traveling a lot through India and saw beautiful women harvesting rice. And I thought, wow, I'm eating rice almost every week of my life, and I don't know where it's coming from. And I didn't want to be part of the system, so it made sense for me to learn how to produce my own food. So I went to one farm in Spain just to learn how to produce my own food, but very fast I realized it was more about the lifestyle of being a farmer. And I thought, okay, if I can find a good way of producing good food, then I want to do it also for other people, not just for myself. So that's how I started, just by learning from other farmers. I looked for farms where I could learn what I wanted to learn. And here I am 12 years later at Haidehof, managing the garden with another colleague, Borg. And we produce around 130 varieties of vegetables. And I don't know what else I should be able to say.
I will come to that when we talk about the farm. So we run a small diversified operation with 3 major business units, and they're all integrated into each other. You see here a little overview of our main production area with the 2 house pastures and the market garden. So the market garden is a little bit like the heart of the whole thing with the vegetable production, and constructing a production system that produces a lot like a vegetable garden, to do that regeneratively and building soil, building habitat, and regenerating our natural resources is actually quite challenging. We do that with a couple of tricks and concepts, I would say. We'll come to that in a second. The same ideas of regeneration of soils, of water cycles, of nutrient cycles we apply at our pastures. And on the pastures we run both poultry and beef. So we skip the video for the internet connection, but let me give you a little overview of the horticulture here at Haidehof. Biointensive, Nordic, mulch. These are the 2 or 3 concepts we apply to have horticulture regenerative at the farm. The first one of not plowing or not digging the soil basically relates to this natural stacking of the soil microbiome. It's a very complex food web which is underneath our feet, and we don't have much attention for it normally. And if we deeply mechanically turn soil, it's always a very strong change to the soil's ecosystem. And by not turning it and not plowing it, we try to keep these natural layers intact and support the microbiome of the soil. Biointensity means we plant very close together, and there's a saying in the US where it basically says every farmer is in the solar business. And that's very true, because in a matter of fact, we try to turn sunlight together with CO2, nutrients, and water into usable biomass for animals or humans. And the interlink is the photosynthesis of the plant. And by maximizing our little solar panels on the fields, we maximize our harvest and we maximize the solar gain, if you want to call it like that. It comes with the disadvantage of not being able to cultivate easily with big machinery. So we have a lot of manual labor in the garden, and in a matter of fact, that nicely integrates with another social responsibility we see in agriculture, and that's providing good and purposeful work. So on this very small patch of garden, we cultivate about 2,300 square meters. We have 4.5, 5 people working there during the season. And in comparison to conventional agriculture, that's quite a high key on personal per land. The mulching is a very simple thing to just close up with the third principle. Soil as a complex ecosystem needs a protective layer. And in nature, that's always a layer of leaves and sticks. And we try to simulate that with compost, with leaves we collect from the farm, with straw, with hay, or also with technical mulching materials, basically to give the soil an armor and protect its life. If we look at the garden, it's very important to mention that we market all produce directly from the farm. It's super essential to integrate the value chain. Also, the production of young plants is done at the farm, so that from seed to euro in the cash register, the whole value chain is with the farm team. And we also try to diversify, so not only integrate the values along the production chain, but also widen it, and that we do with the pasture poultry, for example. We have dual-purpose birds which we breed on farm, and layer family on a ultra-mobile, lightweight chicken caravan. And they make a very nice addition because they deliver a constant supply of produce. Even though the growing season here is short, we can still sell eggs in winter. And they are very essential ecological co-workers. Basically, they fertilize, they verticulate, and they sanitize the pastures for our cattle. We have the cows just behind the cattle. About 3 days after the cows, the chicken follow. And our cattle herd is small, but very beautiful. We have Galloways and an old German heritage breed. Both are suitable for all year round grazing outside and slow growing, very healthy, and rather small. At the moment, we have 21 heads, and they are moving a lot. And that's also following the mimicry of nature. The whole idea about regenerative agriculture on Haidehof is that we try to find the ways ecosystem work and integrate that into our production models. And if we look at ungulates or large herbivores in nature, they are always bunched in groups, normally somehow bunched by predators. In order to protect, they get very close. And that requires a lot of movement because they trample over their feet and they leave a lot of urine and shit behind, and nobody likes to eat where they shit, so they move. And this frequent movement of the herd is something we lost when we look at set stock grazing or pastures, or even I don't want to say worse, but even way more different stable animal husbandry. So we move cows in the growing season about 3 times a day, and we give them small parcels, and then 3 days later the chicken come and they sanitize the pasture. They pick up all the little maggots which would turn into flies and could be a danger for our cows. They distribute the dung patty, which is like a point source of nutrition, into an aerial source of nutrition. And that's one way poultry and ruminants really nicely work together. And at the same time, they produce manure which we can use in the garden. Because unfortunately here we have to put the cows in the stable in winter. Our pastures get too wet and they would damage the sward. So that's a place where then the compost is produced to feed the garden. And maybe Alba can tell you a little bit more about everyday life and our struggles and our highlights.
Yeah. So farming is a beautiful profession, but it's in our context also very exhausting. We have crazy challenges. We are growing in a very difficult weather, a very short season, and yeah. Sometimes you wonder, why am I doing this? This season, for example, we had crazy problems with our tomatoes. We didn't even get to harvest before we had to throw them away. At that time, I thought, okay, maybe I just should go back to Spain, forget about this farming venture. And yeah, it's a struggle because you have to think about too many things at once. You need to be able to pay salaries where actually food is not being... I don't know. I would say people don't care much about food, and yeah, you have to push yourself. And very often I say, one day can feel like a week. Yeah, it's very, very hard to keep motivated sometimes, but then you have days when you wake up and you see the beauty in the garden, and you have neighbors who tell you, hey, my kids are growing with the food you're producing, and those are the little moments where you say, okay, this is why I'm doing this. Something I always say is that I think people have a lot of power as a consumer, and we don't know it. I think the biggest impact we can do is choosing in what we spend our money and what are we supporting with our money, which is also our time. And it's very easy for people to say, hey, farmers should grow in a better way and not destroy the climate. But what about us as a consumer saying, okay, I want to support farmers who are doing a good job and are actually caring for the ecosystems? That's how other farmers will try to do better. Right now, we're all struggling. Traditional farmers and regenerative farmers, we're all struggling. But if people support us in a better way, then we could keep going. And that's the power we all have as an individual. I don't know if this is what I was supposed to say, but there you go.
Spot on.
I'm curious. How can people listening? How can consumers support? How can they know that what they are buying has that positive impact? Can you give any tips on that?
I believe that the best way is to go to see the farmer in your area, meet them, and see how they're doing their things. I think all of these certificates and all of these labels, they're just bullshit in my mind. We are paying a lot of money just to having a certificate with a label there. The inspections are ridiculous. Like, we got a lot of problems just because the label of the organic certification was like 3 millimeters smaller on our egg package. They are not really checking for what's important. And I think us as consumers, if we go to the farmers and we ask them and we meet them and see their passion and their values, that's how you know. And that's how you can support. Like, okay, I'm going to try my best and I'm going to go to the nearest farm and I'm going to support these people. And maybe say, hey, I see that your chickens could move more. I saw this place in Hamburg and they're moving their chickens every day. And these are the things that make farmers interested in learning and in changing. I think it's very easy. We just need to be... It should be more a priority from our side as individuals, wondering what am I doing with my money? What are the consequences? What kind of salaries are the workers getting? Like, nobody thinks about that, right? That's also a regeneration of our society. How much, if you go to Lidl and you buy a kilo of tomato for 50 cents, okay, are we asking the consequences of that? The salaries in Almeria of these Moroccan people getting 3 euros an hour, working in horrible conditions, all the pollution, the plastic. That's what you're buying with your money. If you pay, I don't know, 10 euros for a kilo of tomato in our farm, come and see how I'm growing my tomatoes, and come and see my life. I'm giving everything I have for this, everything. I have no private life, and I'm doing it because I know it's a good thing to do. It's what makes me wake up in the morning. you will see the passion, and you will feel it in the flavor. Yeah.
And I think just to add to that, because obviously Alba and Hannes are incredibly committed farmers and do that sort of also with their purpose. And I think some people might think, yeah, but is the farmer that is close to me really open to this? What we find is that farmers are like the point of the appreciation of society is one of the most important elements of why farmers are unhappy. It's even sometimes more important than money. So this is so important for farmers, that they have the feeling of, I'm producing this, I'm working day and night in order to produce this food, and I do not get the appreciation for it. I don't get the money for it, but I also don't get the appreciation for it. And so a lot of farmers are incredibly open and incredibly interested in that interaction. So really, really recommended. And of course, there's also sort of programs for that, right? Like you have the community supported agriculture, Solavi in German. You have platforms for this. You can source your meat from farms in your region, and this is very, very recommended because it goes directly sort of to better conditions for the animals. So there's a lot of possibilities for us to engage in that. And honestly, and I think this is sort of to Alba's last point, you notice it not only in the taste, or because I think, or let's put it differently, the taste is an expression of the nutrients in the food. There's actual research, quite a bit of it, that we have lost large percentages of the nutrient density in our food over the last couple of decades. So in order to get the same amount of nutrients from vegetables, you have to eat many more of them. So, and the reason is that plants need soil life in order to pick up these micronutrients and build them into the plant. So you're going to have very, fat paprika that is, but that's mainly nitrogen. So in order to really give that the value, you need soil life, and you need to do the work that Alba and Hannes are doing there. I'm really looking forward to this. There's new technology coming out now that allows us to measure nutrient density in the moment, and I am so looking forward to this, because I hope this is going to be such a game changer in the supermarket. But just a couple of things about that. I'm curious. I think we have a lot of time, and we haven't really properly talked about how does agriculture and climate, like how does it actually work? And maybe Hannes wants to talk a bit about like how does the carbon go into the ground?
I would also be really curious, Ivo and Hannes, before that though, then I also want to talk more about, okay, how can the people get involved with their companies? Because that's obviously a big lever, but thank you so much for sharing this. It's already wonderful to see that. And also interested to see if you're engaged in community supported agriculture. So if also the people around Hamburg, is it also can actually get involved? Because to just explain to the others, community supported agriculture, so LAVI, the system is that you get a share of a produce of that farm, and you get that percentage every week, regardless of whether the harvest was good or bad. So you're sharing the risks as well. It gives a lot of stability to the farmers, and of course you get a lot of, you always get the food basically that's grown in that season, and you also invited to share in 2 or 3 harvesting or planting days a year there. So it's as a consumer, you become part of the producer and become part of the community of growing and eating the food. So, but now your question, sorry.
Which one first? Shall we talk about how companies could get involved? Because we also have some thoughts about that here at Haidehof. Or should we first talk about the magic process of photosynthesis?
First the magic process.
Okay. I mean, Ivo mentioned in his introduction, basically, plants breathe in CO2, if you want to say like that, and they use that to build biomass. And quite a bit of the biomass goes to the roots and to something we call root exudates, or the juice of the root. And that's something plants have started to do because they are the only organisms on this planet who can harvest sun through photosynthesis. but they can't do other stuff, and their soil life comes into play. So we know, for example, there is nitrogen fixing bacteria living at the root of a plant, and it feasts on the root exudates, which is shed out by the plant, and in exchange, the plant gets nitrogen, which it could not sequester itself. And that's a very funky thing. Christine Jones said we have to think of the rhizosphere, so the area of the root, as the hottest bar in the soil town. And that's where all the liquid sunlight is provided to to nurture microbes, and the microbes nourish the plant in return. So by inhaling CO2 and pushing that in carbohydrate form into the ground, plants take CO2 from the atmosphere and they put it where it belongs. Because when it builds then the microbial bodies of the soil life, these decompose and they turn into humus. And ideally, if we don't plow and it oxidizes and goes back to the atmosphere as CO2, this stays in the ground. And vegetables are one way to do that. A way more promising approach, or in addition, a very promising approach, is grass. Most grasses are perennial plants, and they develop very, very deep and very fine root systems. And that's a lot of organically bound carbon, which could have been in the atmosphere before. And by proper grazing management, we can really enrich poor soils and increase the carbon levels quite drastically. So the whole link is photosynthesis and an intact and healthy microbiome, which takes up all this liquid carbon, if you want, and stores it in humus, I guess. But feel free to add, Ivo.
That's why I asked you. I know how well you explained this.
Good. I would like to encourage the crowd, if you have questions, do voice them in the chat. And so yes, Hannes, Alba, Ivo, how can companies get involved? Obviously through their canteen, if they have one, but also through certificates, compensation, what have you. Let us take part in how you can enrich the company's climate journey and make it really valuable in multiple ways.
Palms first.
Maybe just quickly, so I stop sharing the screen. We have one last slide. So we rent the farm from two families in Hamburg who bought the place a couple of years ago. And one of them is doing sustainability workshops with the UNO-INO network. And it's quite interesting what the emergence of companies to a rural regenerative concept moves. And UNO-INO is like a pathfinder for sustainability in a company context. And Susanne Preis, who's one of the owners of the farm here, she's trying to sensitize the complexity in organizations and basically show the analogies to the complexities in nature, and by that find regenerative approaches for company development. And it's a very interesting thing, and if it's possible, I can share like a little PDF file with some information on these workshops. Maybe I can do that via the chat or upload it at a later stage.
Best put it in the chat.
Perfect. So then I can stop the screen sharing, and you have one approach how we deal with it, apart from connecting producer and consumer.
That's great. Really, really intriguing to hear more about these workshops.
Yeah, and it's something that we've been exploring at Climate Farmers. The question of, well, it's one thing to talk about regenerative agriculture, and then we started thinking more and more about like what would it mean to develop a regenerative work culture, which might go in that direction as well. Like, how do you produce high quality outputs while restoring sort of the natural basis of our cells, right? So I was just thinking about that. Other ways of getting involved. I mean, of course, what you just said before, Tim. Yes, if you have a canteen or encourage your employees to buy regionally to buy high quality produce, care about the health of your employees. Furthermore, as I was describing before, farms, more and more farms want to transition to regenerative agriculture. That is, the last couple of years have seen an explosion of interest in that sense. So when we started our work with climate farmers about 4 or 5 years ago, I went and talked to farmers and also general industry about regenerative agriculture, and they were, they thought I was talking about fairies and funny energies. Within a couple of years, there has been an incredible surge of interest, and by now this is something that is supported by the European Union. That is sort of has become very mainstream. Has been written about in every major industry magazine. So there's a lot of interest, and still the question is, great, now I know what I should do in order to regenerate my soils. I know that maybe I want to plant an agroforest on my field. Maybe I want to reduce my pesticides. I want to stop tilling the ground and ripping up these networks that Hannes was describing. And at the same time, all of these things require investments, require experimentations, and experimentation is tricky. I try out something new, I might lose the entire harvest of that season. And to do that, we need to support farmers in taking that transition, because farmers are with the back to the wall financially, right? A lot of farmers are in debt. So to take any kind of experimentation means to maybe not be able to pay back the interest of their debt and potentially risk their operation. So we need to support farmers in that transition. And at the same time, we have a growing need for what is called carbon certificates. So I believe in the previous session you have been discussing the carbon markets. This is something that is more and more important and will become more and more important. And the question is going to turn more and more into what kind of certificates are we talking about? Because not all certificates are created equal, right? And first of all, and this is something I really want to emphasize, before we talk about anything regarding carbon certificates, offsets, we talk about reductions, right? So any kind of offset is always offsetting unavoidables, because otherwise we will not get to where we need to get.
Yeah.
Once we have that, we really need to look at how can we use the financing from these carbon certificates in order to really make as much of a systemic change as possible. And there's a lot of talk around, tree planting, forest planting, which makes a lot of difference whether you're really just planting trees or you're talking about planting and maintaining forests. The same is with agriculture. We need to make sure that what we're doing, that the money that we are spending on carbon offsets go towards the biggest possible systemic change. And so if companies are interested in that, we are right now piloting these first carbon plus certificates, which are very transparently done. All of the calculations can be sort of recalculated. We're working with the TÜV in the auditing of the process. And in the end, the idea is that this financing goes towards the farmers to make the necessary changes that they need to make in order to really set up their farm for the long term, and at the same time capture carbon, infiltrate rainwater, improve biodiversity, improve nutrient cycling, and improve the bioproductivity of their field, which in the end, this is what agriculture is about, right? Like, yes, we want biodiversity, we want carbon, but we also want great food. What can get involved by investing the carbon offsetting finances into a systemic change through agriculture.
Right. Thanks. I'm really happy we're having this panel and to close the day and get this really to the ground. brings me back to, impact investing, brings me back to politics, because there's of course many more sources that could provide an income, a stable income to farmers who are willing to transform. I'm sure you're trying all this, but who would not care for their local farmers? So that's something to address local politicians. And you really want to help us. Here is how.
And it's both, honestly, because I mean, most people here are going to be aware of agricultural subsidies, right? Which is
yeah, of course,
1/3 of the European Union budget. So we're putting a lot of money into agriculture. And I don't know the numbers for all of Europe, but in Germany, these huge sums that we're investing in agriculture result in 90 billion in externalities. So we put a lot of money into agriculture in order for agriculture to cause costs for society, which is a crazy concept. So what we really need to do is we need to funnel these 1/3 of the European budget, which, yes, it is a huge amount, and at the same time it is a necessary amount that we need if we want to maintain food security in Europe. But we need to funnel that towards regeneration. And these carbon certificates that we're talking about are the first step in a series of funding mechanisms that are being developed in order to bring financing into regeneration, not into destruction. This is what we're doing right now, and we really need to stop this.
Yes, it's insane. Thank you so much, Hannes, Alba, Ivo, for being here and sharing this with you. It was really nice and really inspiring and really helpful and very profound. We have another 10 minutes break, and there are lots of hearts and thumbs up coming, which is nice. If there is no more question coming from the others, I think we'll close this and meet again at 5 o'clock for a round of debrief. That will be in groups of 3. We'll meet in a conference setting here. It's been a long day. I don't expect that will be 150 people, but there'll be a few. We go in groups of 3, take 20 minutes to share with each other the reflections of the day, and have another 10 minutes on bringing it together. So I invite you cordially to take this one last half hour and let this day round out. It's been really valuable for me. This was a great closing session, and we'll share more information and all the certificates that you're doing and offerings you have, workshops, community supported from Haidehof. Very much looking forward to sharing that in our network and among the participants and all those that registered for this event. Thanks for coming.
And thanks especially to Hannes and Alba for joining us on their Harvest Day.
Oh, yes. Very much.
Thank you very much, too.
And to all of you, see you in 12 minutes on the main stage, and then we go in breakout sessions. Thank you. Bye-bye.